Welcome back to Crayon Box Politics. I am Carl Abel, your host, and joining me is my co-host Vanessa. Vanessa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. This cold weather. I know it's hoodie season now, but I decided not to wear my hoodie.
Oh, I totally
See you're
understand.
wearing yours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too cold, and I swear I always get congested around this time of year. So,
So you might as well stay warm, right?
100%.
Yeah. Me and Brandon, we fight over the AC pretty much all year round, but this is the time where I try to keep it off, and he tries to turn it on because it's too cold.
Why don't you just open the
So,
window?
well, because if I open the window, then he wants to turn it off because I got the window open and he doesn't want to heat the outside.
Wait, hold on. You just said that he likes to have the AC on, and you think it's too cold. So if he wants the AC on, wouldn't you just open the window since it's cold outside to cool it off and like appease him?
No, no. He likes to have the heater on because he thinks it's too cold.
Oh, okay. Okay. And you like the AC to be on.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I like the AC. Like, I turn off the entire climate control system
Oh,
during this time of the year because it's nice and cool. And if I need to get warm, then I just layer up and go blankets on the couch.
yeah. Snuggles. I love snuggling up onto a blanket. If it's too hot, I can't do
Mhm.
it. So I totally agree with that, but at the same time, sometimes you have to, come out of your cocoon and it's too cold to come out of your cocoon. So I can see both parts.
So you don't come out of your cocoon.
What about going to the bathroom? You have to come out of your cocoon to go to the bathroom. Okay, unless
Um,
you're just, going to the bathroom on yourself, and then, I mean, that's to each their own.
well, I mean, there's always the good old pee bottle.
Disgusting. That's it. You're on timeout.
Just saying. I'm just saying.
No, you go in timeout, go in the corner and rethink about everything that you just said. It's gross. Girl,
Um,
pee in a pee
so
bottle. We'll pee all over the place. Terrible, terrible.
yeah, I mean, it's better than peeing on myself. I guess I could always wear a diaper.
Ew. You don't wear a diaper till you
Uh,
need to wear a diaper.
Speaking of diapers, did you see the video or the photos of Donald Trump on his uh, Asia trip this past week?
No.
So there is one that very clearly shows a large lump on his leg. That like you can tell it's not part of the leg. Like the trousers are lumping around something that's attached to his leg, um, and it kind of looks to me like a pee bag.
That's it. I'm gonna pull it up.
I'm telling you, take a look at it. It's one of those things, and I mean for the viewers, here it is. But it's one of those things that you look at it and you're like, what is that?
Okay. So just
You
so
have it up yet?
I'm pulling it up. It says the association of Donald Trump and the diaper appears to be entirely related to a long-running political motivated rumor and meme and is not based on factual events that occurred during his trip to Asia.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the diaper though. I'm talking about the thing that looks like a thing inside of his legs.
The thing, all right. I can't put in a thing tied to his leg that looks like a thing to his leg on Donald Trump and get anywhere. Like,
Well, just type in like Donald Trump appears to have
yeah, but then you get the
a urine bag.
okay, appears to have a urine bag. I mean, if he does, he does. But let's see. Images. You talking about this picture?
No.
Because I was gonna say that just looks like kudos to him.
Okay, so you didn't see it. I don't have it readily available. I should have sent it to you when I saw it. Um, but either way, right? Like we've all seen what happens around like international leaders, how they avoid sitting next to him.
Yeah.
And then there was that incident where, I mean, I'll send you the picture later. But it looks like he's got a pee bag, and there's also so everyone started sharing this video of him like when he got to Vietnam, and how when he arrived they were all singing and dancing. And he did his little freaking old man dance, right?
Mhm.
Um, and they're like, "Oh, we're afraid of his mental decline because look at how he's dancing." And I'm just looking at that and going, "That's how he's always danced, bro."
Right.
He's an old white guy that
He has no
doesn't
rhythm.
know any different.
He has no rhythm.
What did catch my eye is his platform shoes.
Oh god, did he have platform shoes?
He had, so they were heels, right? But they were definitely like a good inch or 2 inches tall on the heel. And it was like clear as day. I mean, you could see between the heel and where the heel and the sole hit the ground, you
Uh-huh.
could see daylight underneath his shoe.
Nice. I mean,
I was like,
maybe he's not okay with his height and he wants to appear taller than what he is. Maybe he should have, like, put the shoe instead of having, like, a little light to go through it, kinda like a heel, he should have just had it flat, so where you can't see it and it just looks like a shoe. But, he's maybe
maybe.
just compensating for the fact that he felt like he was short, at least who knows? I mean, people we do it all the
Yeah.
time,
So he's got Napoleon complex.
yeah, but Napoleon was cuckoo cuckoo. Not
I mean,
saying
he
that
conquered Europe twice.
it doesn't that doesn't mean he was so he's a no, no. We all have Napoleon complexes at some point in our life we're not satisfied with, so we can all say everybody has a Napoleon complex.
That's valid. That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true. Um, so as a result of his Asia trip, Donald Trump met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I don't know if you heard about that one.
Nope. I don't watch
Okay,
the news.
so I'm picking this up. So basically, he and Xi Jinping agreed to go back to trade levels at the way that they were back in January before the tariffs started getting placed on things.
Okay. That's good because I feel like there's been a lot I did see, you're gonna laugh. When I was getting my nails done, the news was on, so I was reading what was going on, and there was a small business owner who said how the tariffs from, China were actually affecting her business and everything, and how it's been declining and stuff. So I think, reassessing that and helping because otherwise we're going to put a lot of small businesses out because currently we don't have anybody in the US that provides the services that they were getting from China. So, you can't put out a whole small business based on tariffs.
But experts were saying that that was going to happen before he put the tariffs on. And then all of a sudden, he does this. And then we go back to January levels and he calls it a victory.
So in any business, and you can think of it, any business that you do, sometimes you're going to do things and in your mind and people that have talked to you and everything, they're like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's try this, let's try that, let's see how this goes. And then in the grand scheme of things, when you initiate it, what you may or may not have been aware of, or when people have told you, hey, this is going to happen, you're like, well, I don't think to that degree it's going to happen, so let's see how it goes. It may not be as drastic as people are like other people were thinking because he was getting told by others that it's not going to be that bad. So when you have two sides that are opposing, you're like, all right, let's try, let's see what happens. And then when it comes back and he's like, yeah, you know what? Instead of saying, "Hey, it's a success because I reverted it," he should have said, "Hey, what I initiated wasn't okay, and we're gonna revert back, to how it was until we can figure out a better solution." Instead of just saying, "Oh, yeah, that was a success," instead of like, he didn't own the mistake he made. He just
And when have we ever known? him to own the mistakes that he makes.
Absolutely never. He won't. He's the type of person that's like, let me fix what I did, but don't acknowledge what I did. And then say, "Hey, look what I did. This is success now." Yeah, but you caused it. Like causing the issue and then fixing it doesn't mean that you were successful. It means that you basically unfucked yourself. Like,
You created a problem, you made the mess, you cleaned it up. That doesn't mean that you're you're a good negotiator. Um, but yeah, so I would say, and I would agree with you that maybe he, given him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he did think, oh, you know what? Everyone's saying this, but I think that they're wrong, because he did in his candidacy in the lead up to the election. He very clearly said that the experts were wrong,
yeah, yeah.
right? And so, like, this is kind of one of those moments where I'm not an expert, but I've been listening to the experts, and I hate to say it, Donnie, but told you so,
Yeah.
right? Um, and this is just kind of the situation we're in. Not to mention the Argentinian beef imports that we're going to start bringing in, because beef is so expensive and people can't afford it. So we're going to import beef from Argentina.
Wait. Why can't we okay, why can't we afford beef? Like, there's so many cows. Like, why is it more expensive to buy our beef from America than it is to import it from Argentina to come here and we get beef?
I could be wrong about this, but I think it's because American beef is held to such a high standard that American beef costs more than Argentinian beef, which is not held to the same health and vaccination and virus standards that we are. And so, because of that, we're importing this. And he's even made the claim, hey, you know what? This beef may be tainted. It may not be all good beef, but we're going to import it from Argentina.
So is there a way? Because, like I've looked into it because, like especially with the hormones that we give the chickens, the cows, everything, and like the vaccinations that we're giving them to all that stuff, it's actually affected us as Americans, like where we are, our bodies are we're throwing kids into puberty faster, they're developing things faster, the hormones are all out of control. Um, is there a way that they could, I guess, reevaluate this whole process that we have and be like, "Okay, listen, no, we don't need to inject them with hormones to make their breasts bigger for the chickens so that we have more bigger, larger breasts on the shelves." Like, cut back on those and, which would cut back on cost and look at it that way instead of having all these stringent ways of producing our stuff. And but to say, "Hey, we're gonna import this beef. We're not sure. We're not sure, if it's healthy or if it's good or we don't know, but we're gonna import it because it's cheaper." That's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Gross. Like, but then again, if you think about it, the military and the prisons, the food that they are served, what is it? It's grade D. Like, it's not even
Yeah,
grade D for military and prison use only. Like,
I remember a time when I was on the ship and we were floating through, and I was what we called cranking. And I was in the mess decks, and we were loading on this meat, and it said for institutional use only. I was shocked, right? Because I'm like this 20-year-old and I'm looking at this food thinking that, the military is feeding us, right? No, no, we're getting the bottom of the barrel stuff.
absolutely, we're getting the remainders of whatever they couldn't sell, and we the military gets it, and they're like, "Oh, get send it to the military and the prisons." Like, that's it. Like, personally, the military should get grade A, and prison, okay, yeah, you can send them grade D. That's fine, but not our military. Like, we're supposed to be at the top of our game, and you're feeding us bottom of the barrel, and you're expecting us to be
Mhm.
cognitively aware of what the heck's going on, but you're not feeding us and nourishing us correctly.
Especially like steak and lobster, because man, on chip, when you got served steak and lobster, it meant you were getting bad news.
You got lobster?
Well, we had surf and turf, and that was when we found out that we were getting extended in the Gulf. It, we got surf and turf when we found out that we were getting pushed on shore into Kuwait because we needed to send a detachment into Iraq. Like, yeah, we got lobster and steak, but only when we had bad news.
It was to be like, "Hey, here you go, have fun, enjoy, we're treating you amazing, but then we're gonna still give you grade D crap."
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. See, that's when you start to see like the chinks in the armor there.
Right.
But at least our cooks know how to cook it, right? And to your point about the medication, the vaccines, and all that good stuff, you're probably right. I haven't looked into it as much as you have, especially given the fact that you're in the medical field. But what I'd say to that point, right, is we have all of these requirements because over the course of our history, we have had to have standards increased because what we found were, there was a time when it was okay to have rats running around in your meat plant, in your meat packaging plant,
That's how we ended up
right?
getting the
So,
bubonic plague and all that stuff.
right. So all of those things, there's a reason for them. They're just, there are other side effects that happen.
Right.
And that brings me to my final point. Over this past week, it is November 2nd when we're recording this, and that means that yesterday was the day that uh, SNAP benefits got shut off because of the government shutdown.
Heard about that. I did, that was on the news, real, while I was getting my nails done. I thought that a lot of states were suing, the Trump administration and everything for the SNAPS benefits, and they were saying that they need to pass it through. Did it get, passed, or is it still, or I guess would it be because it's Monday, we have to wait till Monday?
So the federal government has a reserve. I think it's like $6 billion in funds to provide to SNAP in case of an emergency,
Hmm.
right? Um, and the Trump administration is saying, "Hey, no, this is not an emergency because the government is shut down, so we can't use this supplemental like emergency fund because it's not truly an emergency." Um, the courts did come out and they said, "Hey, you will do this. You will release these funds. You will provide the people with the food that they need." And the Trump administration appealed that ruling, which means, guess what? Even if the court said that we will or he will do it, because it's on appeal, it's been stayed, so Trump administration isn't going to do it until they get final word, which means that this probably could go on all the way through until it gets to the Supreme Court, which, guess what, that's going to take a while too.
Right,
So the likelihood of the courts preserving SNAP and getting SNAP, or excuse me, not preserving but keeping SNAP active and open to the public is really, really low. The troops got paid only because we pulled money out of our military R&D fund.
yeah. So, let me
But
ask you this, so, is SNAP's a federal program, correct?
that is correct.
Okay, but isn't SNAP regulated by the state?
Yes. So it is a federally funded program that is administered and regulated by the state governments.
Okay. So if it's, the money the money comes from the federal government though, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if
Cor- some of it,
okay, so
the majority of it.
the majority of it comes from, so but the states, can the federal government, is there a way that they could push it to the state level to where they're like, "Okay, here, this is, this is what you have," and, I mean, every state's different with taxes and everything. Why can't the states be in charge of a program for their state?
Well, because federal revenue, federal taxes are what are used to fund programs like SNAP and welfare and like our social security nets and all that stuff, right?
Okay.
Um, so that money is pulled in from revenue across the nation, right? And then that is then doled out back to the states as needed based on the law and how Congress decides that that money gets doled out. Um, and this is, I mean, this is a great segue because this month we're talking about states' rights. And today, what I want to do is, I guess I didn't answer your question, V.
That's okay.
Um, but here's what I'll say: let's save that question.
Okay.
And let's address that question every single week this month when we're doing the series. And we'll see if we can get to an answer.
Okay.
Um, but with that being said, we're going to talk about what a state is today. And so, without further ado, let's get started.
So,
I am.
like a state, like I know we have the United States of America, and like every state has different laws and different things, and but they fall under one whole thing. Why is it that, like, what'll stop me from saying, hey, I live in New Bern, we'll just say I live in New Bern, North Carolina, and I want New Bern to be its own state. What stops me from doing that?
The Constitution.
I can't. So they've already dictated what states are and where the territory
Um,
is.
so interestingly, the Constitution doesn't define what a state is, right? When the Constitution was written, the framers just presupposed and assumed the pre-existence of the states,
Okay.
right? So they went in and they just said states will do this, states will do that, but they never defined what a state is.
Okay.
Um, and so the way that we understand that relationship and the way that we understand that process is through the Constitution primarily. But we got to look at other things like the Articles of Confederation. And then we also have to evaluate the debate between the Federalists and the Anti Federalists prior to the adoption and ratification of the Constitution. Um, and so, like, there's a ton of stuff in there, right? But suffice it to say, the 10th Amendment prefers or defines rights as those powers that have not already been allotted to like the federal government, Congress, everything. Um, in Article 1, there are several sections that dictate, what the powers of Congress are and what the responsibilities of Congress are. And then it also dictates what states can and cannot do. And one of the things inside of the Constitution says that the federal government can't just go in and say, "Hey, we're going to make a new state and carve out a state" without that state's permission.
Okay. But what about, okay. So what if a state, because, the Constitution says your states have the power and everything. What stops the state from saying, you know what, we don't want to be a part of the United States anymore?
The Constitution
Okay. So because,
and a Supreme Court ruling.
okay, so states can't say we don't want to be a part of you anymore. Like we're done with the way that you guys run this, and we want to be our own country.
Yep, nope. They do not have the authority to do that. Essentially, Texas versus White stated or resulted in a ruling by the Supreme a ruling by the Supreme Court that said that the union is an indestructible union, meaning that all the states are part of the union, but they can't leave the union.
Well, technically, I mean, they could have a civil war and say, "Yeah, we're gonna change this," and, like, we don't like it, and we're gonna do a civil war, like we did before. Like,
Yeah, but that's that's external to the Constitution, right? So there is no constitutional authority for a state to decide, hey, we don't want to be a part of this union anymore.
okay. So, we branched from Britain, right? Because we didn't like the kings and
Mhm.
queens and, like, all that political stuff that they were doing. And then so we came here, but isn't that in essence how we set up our whole country was based upon their sovereign rule and how they were, and like they had their territories, which is technically the states that we have. So aren't we set up exactly the same way?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. So the difference between, and I'll start here, the difference between the United States and hell, the federal states of Mexico, right, or even Canada, is that in the United States, the states are still somewhat autonomous. They still maintain the power and authority over their territory regions, right?
Mhm.
Now, there's statements that we can talk about how the federal government has almost 90% of Montana with regards to state parks and federal forests, how they've got a large chunk of California through federal forests and military bases. And over those regions, the federal government has administrative control. But they can't just take those sections out and make the state of them because they still fall underneath the state borders, right? So the state is still,
In charge.
hey, this is my land type thing.
Right.
But they don't run that portion of the land because the federal government has claimed it as federal territory.
Okay. So that
Whereas, like Great Britain, the parliament, their federal government, right,
Mhm.
their central government controls everything down, and the local governments are just there as enforcement for federal or their central law.
Okay. So in I was watching a show. It's called The Last Alaskans, and it's basically like these families that for their entire life has always lived in this area in Alaska. They build their own homes. They do all this stuff. They fly their stuff out there. It's actually really interesting. But there's only like I'm not up to date on it. Like I started it. I think at this point there's 6 families or 6 people that live in this large area in Alaska, but they can no longer like renew the lease to stay on the land. It basically they're the death of the last child and that nobody else can live on that land. How why if they are living on that land and they have their entire life, how can the federal government step in and say, "Hey, we're not gonna let you live here anymore. Once the last child in your line dies, nobody else can build or live on this land if it's theirs."
It's a complicated question, right? And I don't have the full answer because I didn't research this part. So thank you for blindsiding me.
You're welcome.
But the long the long and short of it is that I think what you're seeing, and I haven't seen this show, so I'm just making postulations here. Um, Gestulations
I don't even know if that's
sounds like a gastro problem. Um,
Jesus Christ. We got some GI issues going on in these states. It's a fine.
and Um, but essentially, there is a land trust, and I could be using the wrong word. So I'll put corrections in the notes for the audio listeners, and I'll put them up on the screen for the visual. But essentially, the way that it works is that the family signs an agreement with the federal government, either for funding, for loan forgiveness, or something. Right? The family did something or signed an agreement with the federal government where they got paid, and that money was used to either support the family or pay off loans or something to that effect. But in return, they trust their land over to the federal government. And then once that that family, once the agreement is met, right, the time limits of the agreement,
Mhm.
the family has to depart the land and the federal government takes it over. And then the federal government turns it, usually it gets turned into a nature preserve. But the whole point dates back to the Great Depression, right? It was a way to keep American farmers on American farmed land. It was a way to maintain and ensure the continuance of American farmland. So more than likely, that's the scenario that this family is in, and they're just not telling the full story for the sake of getting people to watch.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was really interesting because it didn't like to me, it just felt like if that's what they're doing and I mean, Alaska's huge. Like literally, Alaska is half of the other states, like on the map. It'll take up half of that. if there's a small, like, on the map, like, when they show it, it's, like, this big in Alaska, it's, like, this little tiny little area, and it's, like, most of Alaska is uninhabitable, or people don't just live there. So, if this one little area and these families are there, like, what it's not hurting anything. They're not hurting the land, they're not hurting anything. They're literally building these houses themselves. They cut down the trees, they do all that, and it's
Mm.
like to me, it's like they're self-sustaining, and they enjoy that way of life, and now you're telling them basically, "Hey, you can't do that anymore, and now you need to, get out of here and go find a new life." And this, isn't I don't know. I just think sometimes the federal
So
government.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but the other option, right? The other likely scenario is that this is an eminent domain situation.
Mhm,
And eminent domain just means that the federal government, or even state government, or the local government, like is happening here in my town. Basically, what they do is they come in and they say, "Hey, listen, we need this land in order to do X, Y, or Z in support of the community of whatever they have a reason."
mhm,
They give notice and they say, "Hey, this is what you're doing." So the fact that the federal government said when the last child passes, we take the land, like that's really generous. Because that's a long time,
mhm.
and it's a long time for the federal government to wait. Um, but getting back to our topic, right? Um, and you would ask the question about what's the difference. The biggest difference is how our states came to be, right? And that's why I always talk about the Articles of Confederation. But when we talk about states' rights or when we talk about voting, it's because the Articles of Confederation were actually the first governing document for the United States.
Okay.
And not to be confused with the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, right? Like that's so seven, 1777, not the 1870s. And basically, what it boils down to is that um, when the colonies decided to go it their own against Britain, right, they banded together in order to provide for the common defense. They were still independent. They were fiercely independent. And when they finally got their independence, they went with the Articles of Confederation because they didn't want to give up their independence. And there was a lot of talk, especially among the Anti-Federalists, which is where I mean we're going to talk about this in later episodes of this series. But you had the Federalists on one side writing the Federalist Papers, and you had the Anti-Federalists on the other side writing the Anti-Federalist Papers. Interestingly enough, and like just a little tidbit, um, the Federalists wrote with and signed their names, so we know that James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were authors, whereas the Anti-Federalists wrote their papers with pseudonyms. So you had Brutus and the poor farmer or the rural farmer or whatever it is. Um, they all wrote under pseudonyms, and so there's a lot of analytics to figure out who the hell wrote what papers. And there's are actually some papers that we have no idea who the author is behind these.
But it's so
Um,
long.
but they argued back and forth. And the reason that we went from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution is because what had happened was each state under the Articles of Confederation had pretty much carte blanche authority. They were independent. They could tax, they could write their own, they could make their own currency. They could treat citizens from other states as non-American citizens or as lesser citizens than their own citizens.
Okay, so it was
I mean, you name it. Like it was crazy,
right, so it was just kinda like the states were their own in essence, they were their own country, in essence.
right? Think of it. Think of it like the UN, NATO, or the European Union today,
Okay, so that's how it was, and then
right? So
they kinda just, like,
right,
merged together and said, "Okay." we are all very similar and we fall under this country, so therefore we need to have a federal government that is in control of federal stuff, that governs us as a state. But so what ultimately in between the two, what ultimately who has the most power? Like if state passes something like let's use North Carolina for an example. North Carolina, you can't buy vapes that are not FDA approved. And they got rid of all of the other vapes. But I can go on to the base here and buy these vapes that are illegal in the state of North Carolina, but I can buy them on base because it's federal property. Which one trumps?
On base, federal law trumps state law.
Okay. And then out in town,
I mean,
state would,
so let me backtrack. It, Again, we're kind of going really into the weeds here, and we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this one a lot more in detail in later weeks. But the the biggest piece to recognize here is that there are things like the supremacy clause in the Constitution, which dictates that the law of the land is the Constitution and the federal government, right? So the federal government trumps everything,
okay.
right? Hypothetically. But then you have the discussion about states' rights, and you have the 10th Amendment, and you have Article 1, Section 10, which talks about what states cannot do, right? So, like, they can't tax other states, they can't tax the federal government. You have Article 4, which talks about how states can interact with one another. And then you have Article 5, which talks about the amendment process to the Constitution. And you've got Article 6, which is that supremacy clause. Um, and then you have the 10th Amendment, which talks to specifically what is not enumerated in the Constitution is enumerated to the states. So if it's not in the Constitution as a federal responsibility, it's a state responsibility. And there's a lot of problems with that 10th Amendment piece, right? It's one of those finicky pieces. Because what does that mean? Does that mean that only the things that are listed by the Constitution as a responsibility of Congress are those things that the federal government can regulate and do? Because that means that the only things that, per the Constitution, Congress has the ability to, or has a responsibility and the power to tax and spend, to borrow money, to regulate commerce, to establish naturalization and bankruptcy laws, to punish counterfeiting, to coin money and regulate its value, to build post offices and post roads, to promote science and the arts, to create courts, to define and punish crimes at sea and violations of international law, to declare war, to raise, fund, and regulate the military, to run the nation's capital, and all other things which are necessary and proper. That's where it gets you.
But yeah, you always have that clause it can,
Right.
it's interpreted, and that's the thing. So if if it falls under federal government to declare war, if say, because I've heard talks about where they're like, oh, the way I've heard people say the way that the country's going now is going to lead to a civil war. Can the states then, if it's going to be a civil war, can they declare a civil war and go, hey, we're against this. We don't abide by this, and we're going to declare war on whatever.
Um, Good question. Answer is no. Article 4, Section 4, right? And I find this one the most amusing because basically what it says is that it is the responsibility of the federal government to provide for the safety and security um, of the United States. So basically, provide security against insurrection and or against invasion. A civil war is an insurrection,
Isn't the state
right? So the
Aren't states in like
go ahead.
aren't they in charge of like the National Guard and all that stuff? So if they can deploy the National Guard at a state level, what stops the state from saying, "Hey, listen, we we can't do this anymore. Like, we're gonna go and we're gonna deploy you to basically rise up and like protect." Let's just use Texas because Texas tends to be the one that's in question, and say that they're like, okay, you're part of the Army National Guard. You're here in Texas, but because you fall under the state and we can deploy you, we want you to protect our borders because we are branching away from the federal government. What stops that from happening?
So that's where like the supremacy clause comes into effect, right? States have operational and administrative control of their individual national guards, right?
Okay.
So you have the Texas National Guard, the California National Guard, but Gavin Newsom can't send the California National Guard to attack Mexico, right? He can use the California National Guard to support law enforcement actions inside of his state. He can use the National Guard to provide support for natural disaster response, but he can't use the National Guard to go to war. Same thing with Texas. Texas can do all the same things that Gavin Newsom can do with the National Guard, but, and here's the caveat, right? They are also considered militia. And because they're considered militia, they can be federalized by the federal government without consent of the governor.
Okay, so in essence, like, so I don't like this because it just like seems to me as like if you give them the power to do this, like, okay, hey, maybe not launch a quote unquote war, but like we're gonna protect our borders. We're gonna say like, okay, I'm gonna deploy you. You're gonna protect the state border. Like we're gonna consider ourselves as a state to be our own entity. We're gonna branch away from this, and because this is what our citizens want. They don't want to be controlled by the president anymore or the federal government, and so we've decided as a state we're gonna do this. Um, how would I understand when you say that the state, there is federal laws against that, and they basically check and balance each other from the state and federal level. But in essence, as long as they're not declaring war and they're just saying, "Hey, protect your citizens," because we don't want to follow this ruling. We want to, in essence, what happens then if it's like they're not technically declaring war, but they're saying, "Hey, we're going to deploy you to protect our citizens and everything." Like who and say that the federal government comes back and says, "Oh no, you can't do that." How how can they say that you can't protect your citizens when they're not declaring war?
So I guess for me, looking at it from that perspective, right, is that a state that is putting troops on the border is a state that is in clear violation of the Constitution.
So they
Right.
they can't.
If we're talking about the southern border, that means that they're violating the Constitution because the realm of the southern border and border control and immigration enforcement falls underneath the federal government,
Oh no,
but
I'm
per
not
the Constitution and per federal law. Right. So, but if we're talking about the state borders, now you're in violation of Article 4, right? Because what are they going to be there to do? Are they going to do the things where they stop people on the border and make sure that they're not aligned with the federal government? Are they going to regulate interstate commerce? Because all of that is falls under the purview of the federal government, is in violation of the Constitution. Those things, one, they have happened before, right? And it wasn't necessarily the National Guard, but California, their highway patrol, the Los Angeles sheriffs set up checkpoints on the California border. And I've often wondered, like the checkpoints that you do go through when you travel to California, where you have to stop and declare whether or not you have any type of like plants
for the
or items
agriculture.
like that you're bringing in. Yeah, I often wonder if those agricultural checkpoints are not remnants of um, the the movement to stop the Okies coming across the border, right? And this goes back again to like the Great Depression when there we had the Dust Bowl happening in the middle of the country, and essentially what happened is that California was denying Americans from entering the state because they were saying, "Hey, these people are violent. They're immigrating to the state and they're bringing violence. They don't have jobs. It's just causing more homelessness. It's causing our money to go up. It's causing inflation to go up. It's putting a real strain on our financial ability to provide for our citizens." All those arguments sound familiar, but that's what California was saying at the time. So it's not that it hasn't happened before, but it has. Um, but at the end of the day, those actions were in direct violation of Article 4, Section 2, which is that states have to treat non state citizens equally.
Okay. That makes sense. It's just like, so why is every state so different? Like, why can they make all these different laws and stuff within their state? Like, let's take tax, and I understand that the federal government gave it to them, but like taxes, for instance, like there's I'm a big advocate. I don't understand taxes. I don't get it. I don't think my dollars should be taxed like 6 times or whatever. It's like when I get my paycheck, I know federal taxes came out of it. I know state taxes came out of it. Medicare, Social Security, all that stuff has already came out of my paycheck that I'm getting. But then on top of it, I go to the store and now I'm paying state taxes again for what I'm buying, which I know that they've already paid a tax to get the product. So now my same dollars getting taxed, this is now what, 4 or 5 times already. And it's like, why, if I'm already paying state taxes for my paycheck, why am I also paying state taxes again for produce that I'm buying?
I like how you're throwing taxation things at me, right? I states have to get money somehow,
They already got it from my
right?
paycheck
And
already.
but they didn't, right? So that's the thing is that um, there's the sales tax are actually locality taxes, and a large number of sales taxes apply to each locality. So you're going to pay a different sales tax based off of the locality that you're in. So if you're in Craven County, you're going to pay a sales tax that is different than in Jones County. Now, if I remember right, North Carolina has an across the board sales tax, whereas California does it by county. Um, so I could be misspoken on that statement. Again, corrections on screen and in the notes. Um, but bottom line up front, and to your question, the reason that they're all different is because of that autonomy thing, right? They are different to an extent. They are different in the way that they operate because each state has the freedom of and the ability to function the way that they see fit. They are free to do the things that they want to do. And the federal government can't tell a state government how it will run the show,
Okay.
which has come up in a lot of challenges. And we'll talk about some of those things where the federal government kind of overstepped its boundaries. But again, bringing it back to what a state is under the Articles of Confederation, the 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 states were independent and aligned with a smaller, weaker federal government, which consisted of just the Congress. And the federal government had to ask permission to tax the states. The federal government had to ask permission to raise an army from the states. And what that looked like is Congress saying, hey, we need to pass this. We need to get approval from the states to do this. It was really slow. It was really cumbersome. And the resulting situation gave nothing but chaos across the board. Like, depending on what state you were in, the laws were different and you were treated differently. The Constitution essentially said the federal government will function as a state itself. So when on the international stage, people think of the United States as a singular state, singular entity.
Mhm.
And so the when they look at the federal government is a state in per the definition.
Mhm.
Again, definition here and then definition down in the notes for the audio listeners. Um, Under the Constitution, states maintained the definition of of being an independent authority within its own territory, right? So the territory of California is governed by the California government. There is a supremacy clause, which means that when the government says something, that all states have to abide by it. But there's a limit to that, right? Like the federal government has said that marijuana is an illegal substance. California has said, and multiple other states have said, "Hey, guess what? Um, we don't think it is, so we're going to legalize it."
Like like that makes no sense to me. Like if the federal government says that it's a crime, right? But then the state says no, it's not a crime. What how how can they go against it? Like, and then it comes down to that was actually one of the questions I just wrote down. With a crime that they come by, who gets to determine the punishment for crimes? Like, say that, I come from California, marijuana is legal in California. I come and visit my family member in North Carolina where marijuana is illegal, but I came from California. I have marijuana on me, and I get pulled over in North Carolina. They search my vehicle, they find my marijuana. It's illegal here, but I bought it in California where it is legal and I'm a California resident. Do I fall under the state of North Carolina as I just created a crime there by having marijuana, but I didn't purchase it there, or do I fall under state of California?
Yes. So when you are in another state, you are still subject to that state's laws, right? So just because you're a resident of California doesn't mean that you get to visit North Carolina and smoke weed out in the open in front of a cop and get away with it. So that's point one. The laws can be different depending on the state, just because of that autonomy. Now, point two, because you cross state borders, you have now entered into federal territory. That's why we have the FAA, because planes fly and airspace covers
Well,
intrastate operations,
okay. So they have to have,
right? So the minute you cross from California into Nevada, you have violated federal law because you are now transporting an illegal substance.
okay. So if you once you cross borders, you then fall under federal law. Okay. No, that
Right.
makes sense completely because I was like, I didn't always quite understand that. Um, so basically,
At least that's how judicial precedent has applied.
okay. So if as long as like if say I was just in North Carolina, I committed my crime just in North Carolina and I didn't cross a border, I would just fall under North Carolina. But if I once I cross a border, like say I did a crime in North Carolina and I then cross into South Carolina, it's now becomes a federal crime, correct?
The gray area,
Okay.
generally speaking, what happens there is that there is under Article 4 there is a rule about extradition, and so because states have to recognize and um, acknowledge the laws of other states. What happens is that if you violate a law in North Carolina and you cross into South Carolina, but you get picked up in South Carolina, they're going to arrest you and then they will extradite you and send you back to North Carolina.
Okay. Okay. So it does
Right.
right. Okay.
Right. So, but there are things like capital crimes, murdering, stuff like that. If you go and rob a bank because banks are FDIC insured, meaning that they cross state commerce, it's the intrastate commerce process, you now violated federal law. It's one of those gray areas where it depends on the severity of the crime and the type of crime that you are committing, whether or not you're violating the federal law and you're going to get charged under federal rules, or if you're violating state law and you get charged under state rules. So, for example, Donald Trump in New York City, right? Before he got elected to president, he was found guilty of by a jury of his peers 34 felony counts,
Mhm.
right? And those 34 felony counts, they're not federal
Right,
counts,
they're state.
they're state counts.
Mhm.
So in the state of New York, and because all the other states have to acknowledge it, right? He is a felon. And because of that, now there are federal rules that apply. Because he's a felon, he can't own a gun,
Mhm.
right? So no matter where he's at, if he gets found with a gun, he is now in violation of the federal law, and therefore
Yeah. Then he falls.
he's going to get hit with that one too,
Okay.
right? Um, so that again, that's one of those things where it's kind of difficult to talk about in a very short podcast.
Right. No, I get it. So it's basically the states are in charge of the states, but they also follow federal law, and the Constitution. And so that ultimately, when it comes down to everything, you are still subject to following the Constitution, even if your state is different and has different laws than what the federal government's laws are, as long as it doesn't violate the Constitution, is what I'm gathering from our whole conversation. Am I correct?
Yeah, so I guess the simplified term, right, is to say that a state is in the context of the United States is a sovereign and independent entity that has joined with other sovereign and independent entities, political entities, under a permanent constitution by which they grant authority to for the purpose of uh, governance, self defense, and safety.
Okay, so the sovereign, it's basically the state can govern its own people the way that it sees fit and justified, and the federal government can also, if it applies to federally.
That's all we got for this week.
Works. Yeah. I like to clear up the mud.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Well, to our listeners, our podcast is predominantly built around visuals. So if you are a visual person and you want to see what we're putting up and what we're talking about, the best way to do that is watch us on YouTube. But if you are more of an audio, listen to it while you're driving to and from work. The podcast, the audio version of the podcast, does just as good a job. So make sure that you smash that subscribe button. It's free, so that you can make sure that you get the most up to date information about what we're doing in the information that we're talking about.